When that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning.
Hey everybody, it's Hannah Saulic, the head of video here at CinemaBlend, with Sean O'Connell, our managing editor, and I was almost about to say an author of the Release the Snyder Cut book, because that was just a very weird...
You can still say that. That's okay, I'll allow you to say that.
I'm out of practice, but we're here to talk about the Batman spoilers.
It'll be fun.
I'm so glad we're doing a spoiler conversation, because it was tough to do a spoiler-free review and not get into all of the in-depth reasons why I thought that this movie worked so well. It's fascinating to think about that after Nolan and after Snyder and, going back to Burton, that there's still fresh ways into this character. And obviously, he has decades upon decades of comic book issues and artists and creators on that side that you can draw from. But I can't get over how different this feels that Matt Reeves has done with this character and with this world of Gotham, how different it is from everything else. Someone tweeted this, and I wish I could give them credit because I can't think of who it was, but they were like, I went back and watched The Dark Knight, and it was just like, oh, this is just Chicago, right? Because Matt Reeves' Gotham looks so different, and it's different from Burton, and it's different from what Nolan tried to attempt, and it, to me, is the closest that we've seen to the comics at this level. And a part of the reason why I love this movie as much as I do is because I was so engrossed in everything going on in Gotham that no matter what avenue the film decided to go down, whether it was going to follow some stuff that was going on at the Penguins Club, or if it was going to the orphanage where the drop heads were camping out, and you're learning more about the history of Gotham. I was engrossed in all of it, and I couldn't get enough. And so I had mentioned that when the 3 hours were over, I would have sat there for 3 more hours because I just wanted to keep learning more about this universe. And I thought that was pretty impressive that Matt Reeves pulled that off.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I was like, when it ended, I was like, is that my favorite Batman film? And I had that thought for a second, but then I did rewatch The Dark Knight over the weekend, and I was like, no, but I think it might be a close second.
You just couldn't let me go, could you?
It was interesting because I had a lot of friends who went to go see it that aren't really, comic book movie following type people, and so they, I think, were expecting something a little bit more along the lines of because Nolan's films and even Zack Snyder's films obviously were so big. And so I got a lot of texts from people being like, I think I'm missing something. And once I kind of explained to them, this is supposed to be a neo-noir detective Batman, really intimate story, they were like, oh, I wish I would have known that going in. And then for a lot of them, it kind of changed their thoughts on it, which I thought was interesting.
No way.
But I loved it. I thought it was such a great idea to kind of shrink it down a little bit. But to your point, even in shrinking it down and focusing so much on Gotham, it still felt so expansive. And I'm so excited for all the HBO Max stuff that they're going to do.
And there's so many really interesting characters that populate, all the different corners of this world. Penguin. More of him, please. More of him.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised how little he was in the film.
But I think that that's okay. One of the issues that gets leveled at previous Batman films, and I mean, even going back to the Schwarzenegger one, is that there are too many villains, and sometimes they steal too much focus away from. And you know what? I don't know. How did you feel about this? I again felt that Batman I thought he was overshadowed by his villains. If I was going to talk about the performances in this movie that really got me, I would mention John Turturro, and I would mention Colin Farrell, and I would mention Paul Dano before I even got to Pattinson. So, is that good for a Batman movie? I'm not quite sure.
What do you think?
I really didn't think the villains overshadowed him. I thought he really, really pulled your attention. But again, I just love him. So maybe that's why.
Sure.
But there's been a lot of chatter online about John Turturro. And some people really like him as Carmine, and some people really don't, which I thought was kind of shocking.
Oh, interesting. That's how I would want him to be played, as sort of this sinister, pulling all the strings. And yet, even when you think you've gotten to the next level of who is in charge, I guess this is spoilery, so we can discuss the fact that, he has bought almost everybody and he's in charge of almost everybody. And so to that end, I wanted to discuss the fact that I was pretty disappointed that of all the villains that they take off the board at the end of this one, that Falcone is one of the one who gets who gets killed. And I even someone asked that, they were like, is he definitely dead? I mean, he looked definitely dead to me.
Yeah.
It's cool that last shot of Penguin is him sort of overlooking Gotham, and they're having the voiceover about, a power vacuum having to be filled. And I'm sure that Penguin's going to try to fill that void kind of thing. But I don't know. I love Totoro, and I would love to see him stick around for at least one more movie.
Let's move on to Catwoman. You mentioned in your spoiler-free review that you had some issues with how she was used, but you didn't want to get into them because obviously spoilers. But now that we're talking spoilers,
sure.
Please elaborate on your Catwoman thoughts.
I thought that there were a lot of story elements attached to Selina that they could have picked one or two and left it alone. Like the subplot with her missing roommate girlfriend, and then when she was trying to steal money from Falcone's organization, and then when she was Falcone's daughter, and then the love interest of Bruce, like it felt like she had 5 or 6 storylines orbiting around her.
You got a lot of cats.
I thought that Zoe Kravitz did a great job with, as all the things that she was being handed. I thought the movie handed her too many different things.
Don't worry, honey, I can take care of myself.
I'm like, scratching at tiny little things to see like why it's not a perfect movie. But I guess you disagreed?
I was not pulled out of it by that. I will say, by that, God, if I could talk. I will say that there were certain times in the movie where you said something interesting in your interview with her, where you kind of said like it seemed like she was playing a part in each scene that she was in. While I was watching the movie, there were certain times where just in her scenes, I would get pulled out of it a little bit because I was like, I don't understand how in this scene she was that way and in this scene she's now this way, which is maybe some of what you're talking about a little bit. But then once I kind of started reflecting on the movie a little bit more and thought about that interview where she's telling you that like that was kind of the whole thing, is that Selina's still kind of figuring out who she is and putting on these different personas depending on who she's around. I was like, oh, that's really interesting actually. And maybe that's kind of like part of what we were supposed to get with her, was sort of this like uneasy, like who are you type of feeling, because she doesn't even really know yet, because she's not Catwoman yet, and she's not maybe like, because I also kind of expected her to be a little bit smarter than Batman at sometimes, because like Catwoman traditionally kind of like plays him a little bit, and I didn't really get that vibe from the two of them at all during this. But then I kept having to tell myself like, wait, this is still like a really, really like young version of her that isn't quite maybe the character that I expected it to be. But I do just want to quickly say about Catwoman before we move on, I overall really enjoyed Zoë Kravitz's performance, and I obviously love Catwoman, and I'm excited to see what Matt Reeves potentially does with her, if anything. I think I want to give Wonder Meg a shout out, her channel. She said something that I totally aligned with. She said, it just makes you like happy to be a woman. And that is something I totally resonated with. If you have not watched her review, I'll put a link in our description, but you guys should go do that.
Nice. I love her. She's the best.
It was just, she's awesome.
Let me ask you a question about Catwoman before we move off the topic. Because they went their own ways and she kind of left Gotham, would you be okay with her not coming back for the sequel? Like, can they leave her on a shelf and go with a different character?
Yeah, I kind of thought that was the point of like, it was either gonna like potentially be a series. And I'd love to see like in a sequel, we go see some other villains. And then maybe like in the third one, we have like full force Catwoman come back after she's kind of gone off and became Catwoman. You know, like I don't necessarily know that we need to see that with Rob's becoming, you know, Bruce and Batman and all this other stuff. Cause we already know that Matt Reeves probably wants to do stuff with other villains. So I think like
almost interesting if when she returns.
Yes.
If Bruce is so different. Well, she doesn't know that he's Bruce. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because she hasn't figured it out by the end of this movie. Okay, that's cool. Plenty of ground to cover.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about the Riddler. You think that there's a missed opportunity about the Riddler's motivation? Let's get into that.
Only because, and tell me if you thought this as well too, I really thought that the journalist who got killed because Thomas Wayne went to Falcone was going to be the Riddler's father or parent, or have some connection to the Riddler. Like that to me would have been the motivation that he needed, of like Thomas Wayne stepped in and I lost my father because of it, and I'm an orphan, you know, for that reason. So when they didn't make that connection and the Riddler just ended up being this online guy, you know, who with 500 followers, who is mad online and he's motivating all these different people, I was like, oh, well, okay, so your motivation is that there's corruption in your city and you kind of hate that. which is fine. That's great. But I thought it would have been a nice, maybe too tidy, but it would have been a tidy way to sort of tie in. Like, otherwise, what was the point of the journalist? Beyond saying that Thomas Wayne made a mistake, I guess.
Well, so, you know the villain Hush?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They're saying that basically, like, that could be a tie to teasing Hush in the sequel, and, like, that would have been Hush's dad, which I thought was interesting, because there's also a shot that says Hush in, like, Riddler.
I've heard that too, yes. But I didn't see it myself. I want to go back and see that. But that, yes, that could also make sense. Which, again, I kind of love the fact that Matt Reeves is, like, laying out plot threads that he can pick up and go in many different directions. But outside of that, I thought this was the perfect way to do Riddler in this universe. You know, like, he can't be, because he often can be, which is why Jim Carrey played him that way. The over-the-top sort of comical campy. Joygasm! And the way you pointed out earlier of how, you know, Batman's not the sharpest tool in the shed just yet.
Yeah.
I love the fact that, like, the murder weapon that he uses for the first, you know, crime is the one that reveals the ultimate plan. And if Batman had figured that out, you know,
there are a lot of things I feel like Batman should have figured out, like, a little quicker, but again, being nitpicky.
Oh, you're really not as smart as I thought you were.
Did you find it pretty funny that Spanish noun conjugating from the Penguin ended up becoming a massive clue?
I thought that was really funny. I thought Colin Farrell was really funny in this movie. I laughed, like, basically every time he was on screen. I thought he was great.
Yes. And I think he's playing it that way. Like, it's okay for us to find him somewhat comical. These villains are supposed to have an element of, you know, comedy to them.
Yes.
And Riddler did not have it. Riddler was pretty disturbing. And so it was great to have a balance of the Penguin that way.
The other thing I noticed too, because I did rewatch The Dark Knight this weekend after I saw the Batman, is like there are a lot of parallels between the way that Heath Ledger's Joker interacts with Batman and this storyline with the Riddler. It's definitely way, obviously, more like on the nose, but
okay, so which one do you prefer? I'm putting you on the spot.
Oh God.
Joker Batman interrogation scene or Riddler Batman Arkham Asylum scene? Come on, gotta choose one.
It's Joker Batman.
I wanted to see what you'd do, and you didn't disappoint.
Give me the Arkham scene.
I've been trying to reach you.
Really?
For this reason.
Okay.
Yeah, for this reason. I really loved where Bruce thought that the Riddler knew his identity. And the way that they play that.
That was so good.
It's terrific. Yeah. It's really subtle, and it's great, like, right before it, when he looks like a file is going to get unlocked. And he says to Gordon, he's like,
maybe this is all coming to an end.
Because he thinks he's going to get outed, right? He thinks his secret identity is going to get revealed.
And the way that he like looks at the camera recording in the corner as like Riddler's talking, and just like the look in his eyes, you're just like, oh God.
I don't care what happens to me.
And when he says we didn't get him, he's the only target we didn't get. And you can sense in Pattinson the relief of like, oh,
he's like, I still got you.
Take that, you friggin' psycho!
Great. It was great. I thought they handled that perfectly.
Yes.
And I also thought, and I mentioned this to Matt Reeves, I forget if it's on Real Blend or in our interview, that this was the first time that a villain in Riddler really believed that this is what sets Riddler apart from Joker. Joker was an agent of chaos who just kept, messing with everything. Whereas Riddler, I think, honestly believed that he was working with Batman, like when Batman says, I'm not part of your scheme, you're a lunatic kind of thing. I think Riddler was genuinely surprised and upset, because he was like, we were doing this together. You brought him into the light. I could never do that. Like, I don't have those abilities. I'm smart, but I don't have. Yeah, it's great. It's great. Like his whole motivation, his criminal motivation, is that he thinks he's partnered with Batman, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's a really great element that the other Batman movies have not necessarily explored. Yeah,
you're so right. And Paul Dano plays that so, like, I could not imagine anyone else doing that the way that he sells, because you almost kind of start to feel bad for him in that moment where he's just like, wait, what? You're like, oh God, you're like really sick. Yes. Which, not that I feel bad for Riddler because he's a serial killer, but
but like in the early stages of his character, like the places that he can go, now that that has sort of been unlocked, can get really, really menacing, especially if he's, manipulated by the guy in the cell next to him.
Do we want to talk about that right now? Should we just segue into that?
Are we getting into that?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Okay.
So it's obviously Joker.
Me? I was right here.
Matt Reeves has said in interviews that he's not Joker yet.
I wanted this character to be a character who hadn't yet declared himself, but all the seeds were there.
And he has said that the reason why he's in Arkham is because...
You know, the unseen prisoner is one of the characters that he would have confronted in year one, and that's how he ended up there. So they have a relationship. There's actually one of the lines from the scene that's not in is that unseen prisoner says to him, he says, it's almost our anniversary, isn't it?
If you read on CinemaBlend, or in case you missed this, there's a deleted scene that Matt Reeves had.
That involves the unseen prisoner that you see near the end of the movie, and Batman goes to him in order to profile the Riddler because he's being written to.
And it would have been a little bit more back and forth of them to show that, like, Batman's a little bit leaning on him, but this guy knows that Batman needs him, so he's messing with him. So he's not Joker yet. So that makes me think that, like, there's still the element of him falling into the chemicals. Like, is that all still due to happen?
Well, so
like,
his face, you could kind of see in the shot, like, he's got some sort of, like...
Is it the scars?
It kind of looks like he's had, like, acid spilled on his face or something, which is why it's so, like, disfigured and not quite scarred, but just, like... almost like burnt a little bit. And they were saying like how that could be Matt Reeves' way of showing like in a realistic way, like what would happen if someone fell into a vat of chemicals. But obviously we didn't really see it yet. So.
The first time that I watched that scene and you only see him through the little hole, before he laughs, I thought, is this Two-Face? Is this his Two-Face? Because you're right. I really did think that it was.
Interesting.
Now he's not, because Matt Reeves has come out and said that it's Joker, you know, or he says it's going to be Joker. And obviously the laugh at the end gives it away. But you're right. That's what the face looked like. And did his nose look really bulbous to you? I noticed that on the second time through.
Oh, I didn't know. I was just looking at his eye and I could see little like perforations almost on his skin.
Yeah.
And I was just, well, full disclosure, I was spoiled for that before I saw the movie. So I kind of knew what was going on anyway. So. How
so? Why? From editing all of our stuff?
From editing your video. No, that, and then I accidentally clicked on an article that was like, it's Joker. And I was like, why did I do that to myself?
But it has to be. Like, there has to be a Joker in this world.
There's no way
and that's, like, if they're turning Riddler into a, you know, Zodiac type masked serial killer, you know, and Penguin isn't the Danny DeVito of Batman Returns. He's legitimately like a crime boss in a club. Like, I'm fascinated to see what this interpretation of Joker is in this world, right? Like, even with Heath Ledger, there was an element of him being larger than the room, you know, and hiding
larger
his backstory
and
larger than that movie for sure. So I'm fascinated to see what Barry Keoghan and Matt Reeves specifically do with that character when they move forward.
So do you think that he's going to be like a main part of a sequel, or like is that something you would want to see? Because I've kind of seen that some people are like Jokered out right now, and the idea that he could be the main villain in the second movie is not so exciting to people. How do you feel about that?
I would be okay if they left him on the shelf for one more film. And even used him, I've seen people sort of refer to it this way, as like a Hannibal Lecter type character.
That would
like
be
maybe,
so good. That would be so good.
Like maybe Matt Reeves took that scene out of this movie because he will use it a little bit more in the second one, of Batman having to go to Arkham to talk to this Joker character to get a sense of, you know, what else is happening. Because one of the villains that I've heard suggested, and I would love for them to pursue, not by anybody official, but is the idea of the Court of Owls, which is
Robert Pattinson is like really, really wanting that.
He's pushing for that. It makes so much sense because the Court of Owls have reportedly been around Gotham for centuries. And all of the corruption that sort of stems from that city starts with them, because you realize they've been influencing everybody of power. And
so does that
and
mean
never
that
been
it
done in live
started
action
with
before.
the Waynes and the Arkhams in this Matt Reeves?
Yes. It could. Yes, it absolutely could. Like if you introduce the Court of Owls and Bruce finds out through some way, shape, or form that his mother or father or both were corrupted or part of the Court of Owls through that, like how does that tear apart this already emo Batman who's super sad about everything? If he learns that about his parents, that would be devastating. So that's where I would love for them to go. And if Batman has to almost turn to this Joker type person as a Hannibal Lecter figure to figure out what's going on with the Court of Owls. Matt Reeves is teeing up a home run, like a legendary historic storytelling. If he can pull that off, that would be outstanding. Robert Pattinson's right. They should totally do Court of Owls next.
Wow.
Nice. Speaking of Robert Pattinson, I think most people online are like, yeah, great Batman. But some people really, really did not like his Bruce Wayne. And I know that you said that in your spoiler-free review, like he's just not in it enough.
Well, I think he's doing for Bruce Wayne what Bruce Wayne has to be doing in year 2 of his quest to clean up Gotham, right? Which is essentially Robert Pattinson's interpretation of him never wants to be Bruce. He wants to be Batman the whole time. He wants anytime he's forced to be Bruce for any reason, whether it's to meet with the financiers, or to attend this memorial service. He's pained, like he does not want to have to do it. He views it as wasting time when he could be in the cowl, being outside and fighting crime. And so eventually, and I think towards the end of this movie, which sets up him to become Bruce in a different way, is that Batman realizes that he can be the symbol of hope instead of this symbol of constant vengeance. And with hope comes the translation of him becoming this playboy billionaire, essentially, who shows himself around Gotham and becomes this icon that Gotham can look up to in Bruce Wayne. And so I think that that's the natural evolution of the character. And I'm not that surprised that in this one, he's trying not to be Bruce as much as possible. And that's a little bit why Alfred's saying to him also, hey, you're still a Wayne. There's things that you have to do as a Wayne, and pushing him forward into the spotlight that way.
Yeah, it almost kind of seemed to me like he didn't even know who Bruce Wayne was. Like that just wasn't even like a persona.
Who are you under there?
I'm not so sure.
I never thought of it this way, but it stands out more in this film, is that if he's the playboy Bruce Wayne, then him mourning the loss of his parents is shortchanged a little bit, right? Like, because he's being social and out on the town. Whereas with this one, for the first time in a really long time, maybe with Keaton early on, did I feel that like he's consumed by the grief of the loss of his parents. All he wants to do is get vengeance for him, and he can only do that in the suit, according to him right now. That changes by the end. He does realize, I can be a symbol for hope instead for this city, and still clean up the streets while I'm providing a different sort of light for the citizens of Gotham. But for the majority of this 3-hour run, he's consumed by his grief, and I think that that's really, really appropriate for Bruce at this stage.
Yeah, I wonder if you could I'd have to pay attention to this more on a rewatch, but like if you could almost kind of separate the film by like stages of grief almost, because it seems obviously at the end it's kind of acceptance, and clearly we get the anger part in there.
I'm vengeance.
I don't know though that I can see like Robert Pattinson's Bruce Wayne being, how like Christian Bale was like really, really playful, and like I don't ever see like Robert Pattinson being Bruce Wayne that's like a playful playboy, like got this like smugness to him, I mean, maybe. That'd be interesting to see.
Disagree.
Really?
I think Pattinson could really do that. Yes.
No,
and I think
he
would have a lot of
could,
fun
but
doing
like,
that.
in the sequel, if they just pop on and it's Bruce Wayne at a party with like 2 girls on his arm, he's like cracking jokes, would you be like, what the f?
All right, yeah. Maybe it shouldn't happen that quickly.
Yeah.
But he could, because again, like Bruce is still a costume, right? That he's wearing.
Sure.
Like he's not Bruce Wayne playboy. He's never going to be that, but maybe he knows that he has to put that image forward. Like he's pretending to be him as much as he's pretending to be the Batman. So
I would love to see like
Pattinson doing
Alfred
that in
giving
a
him
scene.
lessons on how to do that.
That would be funny. Yes. Now that would be really funny. Because yes, I could see him if like say they open the second movie and he's at a party and he has, like you said, 2 supermodels on either arm, and then he comes down to the cave and he's just like, I hate it. He goes right back to his
Just
My
starts
Chemical
sobbing.
Romance Bruce. yeah. Putting on the mascara immediately.
Oh my god.
The eye black. We're gonna talk about Robin. I want to talk about Robin.
Yes, let's talk about Robin. That's my transition. Go ahead.
That's your transition. Go.
Yep.
So I had this theory that I thought was fantastic, and Matt Reeves shot me down.
Oh no.
Which is, did I tell you this one? Did I tell you this
No.
one yet or not?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I swore that the mayor's son was being set up to be Robin for this world, because he just kept coming back. Like, you see him early on, or it's hinted that he's the one who found his father's body. He shows up at the funeral, and Bruce rescues him from the truck that's barreling into the church. And then when he showed up a third time at the arena, I was like, oh, this kid's totally gonna be Robin. And then Bruce, or Batman, is carrying him out and laying him on the gurney that's getting carried away by the helicopter. And I was like, all right, Matt Reeves, enough is enough. You've shown us that this boy is going to become Bruce's mentee. But Matt Reeves says, no, that is not the case. And he legitimately like seemed to be caught off guard by the question, because he was, in our interview, he was kind of like, oh, that's a pretty good idea. And then he was like, no, I didn't think that, but I like that idea. And he said, instead, this boy was just supposed to be the manifestation of young Bruce. And that, you know, so literally Batman is like carrying young Bruce to safety by the end of the movie. And, you know, the persona of Batman is rescuing. Yeah.
Oh my
it's
God,
very
that's
sweet.
so sweet.
Yeah. So Batman is saving little
Himself.
Bruce and getting him on a helicopter. So yeah, saving himself. But wouldn't it be great if that kid became Robin? Like, I think that Robin can fit into this world.
Yeah, and there was an interview early on where I've been watching a lot of Robert Pattinson interviews, if it hasn't been clear already. But he did say that would kind of be interesting to see how a Robin could be. And like where Catwoman's going, Bloodhaven, is where Nightwing traditionally is kind of stationed. So I wonder, like, there's definitely room for him in this world, but I don't know how I would feel about it like immediately being incorporated. Because I still think there's a lot with like Bruce's journey that I'd like to see before we like slap a teammate in there. But
fair enough.
That is
Let me ask you this question though. To that end of adding a Robin, could you see in any way, shape, or form any other Justice League members appearing in this world? Like, would they fit? Wouldn't it be odd if
just
Superman or Wonder
Aquaman
Woman
rides
showed up
in when
this
it
world?
floods, and Aquaman's like, I got it, guys.
Yeah, right? Wouldn't that be odd? Because it's so, I hate to use the term realistic, but it's so realistic. It's so grounded.
I couldn't imagine anyone with like legitimate superpowers being in this world.
Right. That
like you couldn't explain through like logic that would apply in our world.
Well, I even think it's strange that like some people have suggested villains like Mr. Freeze, because they would want to see how Matt Reeves does a Mr. Freeze. You know,
I would
like
totally want to see how Matt Reeves
chose...
does a Poison Ivy though.
I can see it now.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. Well, she has weird.
You'd have to
superpowers
get
as well,
really
too.
creative with like science and technology, and like have it established that there's just like really evolved technology for both Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. But yeah, I agree. It doesn't seem logical. It's interesting, and I'd love to see it, but I don't know that that's realistic, I guess, for lack of a better
Well, because if you reverse engineer like what Snyder had to do, he introduced Superman first, right? So you had a world in which Superman was established as a realistic thing. So then he countered that with the Batman that Ben Affleck played, which was this grizzled, war-weary, you know, but like larger than the room Batman also, you know? So here you have a Batman in year 2, and by the time we get to a sequel, he's still going to be relatively inexperienced. And I think the villains that he's going to have to face are still kind of like surface level villains. Like you can't get to the place where he's fighting like a Bane or someone like that because it's too far fetched.
Admirable, but mistaken.
All right, before we wrap up, I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite moment from the Batman?
The car chase. The car chase is one of the most exciting Batman scenes I think I've ever seen put to film. The car chase in Batman vs Superman is also terrific. And this is right up there with it, because just the places where Matt Reeves puts cameras and the sound of that engine, you know, coming through the speakers is phenomenal. And the fact that he did as much as he did physically is incredible to me. Like, he tells a story about how, like, because they only had like 1 or 2 shots of getting it, like all the penguin reaction shots that are in that thing are really from just like the first or second time that they ran through that sequence. And I find that stuff to be amazing. So I thought that car chase was amazing. I thought it kept going. Like I kept waiting for it to end, and it just kept going. And it was Yeah, it was terrific. So that's my favorite. What about yours? What's yours?
I'm stuck between, I thought the opening sequence with Batman talking about using fear as a tool, and we're kind of going back and forth between the gas station and the train. I thought that was incredible and just set the tone so well. And it's between that, and then I also just really loved at the end when he like lights the flare and then like pulls everyone out. I was like, that is such a beautiful moment that really got me in a way that I was not expecting to, like, I was like, oh my God, my feelings, emotions.
And the way that candidate had to like swallow her distrust of him, right?
Yeah.
And embrace him.
Like when he sticks his hand out and no one grabs it at first. And then it's the kid. Isn't it the kid?
It's the damn kid again. Yes. It's little Bruce, who's not Bruce.
Little Bruce.
Reaching out and embracing. Here's the thing. I also thought that this movie did an amazing job in a way that the other films haven't done before of showing the level of distrust that the Gotham citizens have for this person who puts on a costume and investigates crime. And it was like right from the very beginning with Matt Reeves putting us in the point of view of Batman when he's arriving at the crime scene, and you just feel the weight of the cop's eyes on him of just like, who the hell is this guy? Like, why is he here? And how often so many people were like, Gordon, you're going to let him like touch evidence? Like, what are you doing? He's dressed up in a costume. And for the first time, like watching this, I was like, oh yeah, it's really weird what Batman does. Like this dude puts on a costume and thinks he's going to show up at crime scenes and like investigate stuff. So when he's in this situation and trying to rescue these people, here we've spent 3 hours being told like why it's weird that this guy does what he does. So when the new mayor looks at him and is like, I can't really accept your help sort of thing. Yeah. It's groundbreaking when she finally does do it. And then he leads them out of the thing with that magnificent, Greg Fraser's cinematography is just
incredible.
Whew, God, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
It is.
Good choice. That's a good choice.
I have to say one thing really quickly and then we can go. But in your spoiler-free review, I asked you to rank the past 3 live-action Batman, which would be Pattinson, Ben Affleck, and Christian Bale. And I left my voice in there saying that so people would realize the context and not yell at you for not including Keaton. But alas, you got yelled at for not including Keaton. So I don't know if you should do that in this video or if you want to do a separate video, but do you want to tell me where Keaton fits?
Well, he's 4th. Unfortunately. And so, I mean, do you want me to keep going with Clooney and Kilmer? I might as well too.
Go for it.
Throw them all out there. I still think Affleck is 1st. I think Pattinson is 2nd. And I put Christian Bale 3rd. I would put Keaton 4th then, and then Val Kilmer, and finally George Clooney last. And no one's going to argue, like George Clooney will tell you that he's last. And with Keaton, while as much as I understand that like that's everyone's kind of, or most people's first Batman and they adore him for that reason, like he was totally overshadowed by his villains in both of his movies. Like Jack Nicholson,
This town needs an enema.
And we were just talking about how great Michelle Pfeiffer was as Catwoman before this.
Meow.
And even Danny DeVito was completely memorable as a Penguin.
I am a man. I have a name.
I love Christian Bale's Batman. I don't love his Bruce Wayne as much. And I love Affleck's like combined. Affleck is terrific as both elements. Like that scene where he's talking down to everybody in BVS as a smarmy Bruce Wayne, but he's doing it as a ruse because he's, investigating something that's going on there too, is terrific. And all of his stuff. Oh, okay.
This is a separate video.
Yeah. You think so? Because I want this. Well, let's do this before we sign off on this. Alfred Bruce dynamics in the Batman, in the Nolan films, and Jeremy Irons and Affleck. How are you ranking them?
Well, it's Michael Caine and Christian Bale are obviously first. They just are.
Interesting.
Then
do you remember how bitchy Jeremy Irons is? Like he's so bitchy.
I hope the next generation of Waynes won't inherit an empty wine cellar. Not that there's likely to be a next generation.
I was gonna put them second. I do love that, but just Michael Caine is like my grandpa. Like there's just something I can't like. It's an emotional thing. But yeah, so then Jeremy Irons is so bitchy. It's so
He always
good.
feels
They're
like his
so
feelings
good.
are really getting hurt. Like his feelings are getting hurt by Bruce.
Go upstairs and socialize. Some young lady from Metropolis will make you honest. In your dreams, Alfred.
Oh, now I want to go watch that now. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing yours
I don't
is
blame you.
he's first. Yeah.
No, I still think I have to put Michael Caine first. Michael Caine is tremendous as Alfred.
But I did bloody tell you.
I think he nudges out Jeremy Irons, but it's a lot closer. A lot closer than people understand.
Well, hey, if you guys want us to do a video ranking Batman and or Batman Alfred dynamics and getting a little bit more into why, or maybe even the Batman movies, which would be a whole thing, please let us know in the comments, and also let us know what you thought of the Batman.
Thank you for supporting CinemaBlend, and hopefully we're going to be putting together more DC videos, so keep it right here on our channel. We'll see you back here soon.